What's up, nerds? You're in the Musheen, and today we brew beer. Step one of the brewing process, relax, don't worry, have a home brew. Last year's batch, not bad. One thing about home brew, no preservatives. It doesn't last forever. You can usually get a year out of it, then you start losing quality. Step two, clean all of your shit. Anything that's gonna touch the beer, you have to have sanitized. Don't go bonkers about it. Just like you're cooking, right? You wouldn't boil pasta in a nasty pot. You wouldn't put your milk in a dirty glass. Everything just has to be cleaned and sanitized. Oh no, did that zoom in? I just lost another piece of that tooth, Jesus.
Ew, nah.
No, don't film it. Step three, boil your water. This is gonna become the brew, the vert, if you will. Most home brew rigs are 5-gallon vessels. You could do more if you're really fancy, but if you're a hobbyist like me, who's gonna drink most of it himself, 5 gallons at a time. But boil 5 gallons on your stovetop. I dare you. I'll wait. It's going to take forever. Instead, we do 2.5 gallons or so, and then later we pour another 2.5 gallons on it to sort of like thin it out and make it a 5-gallon batch. So, put it on boil, wait for it to steep. Once it boils, you got to pull it off and let it cool because we want it at about 160 when we put in the first bit of ingredients. While you're waiting, of course, you relax and have a home brew. Okay, I should have mentioned at somewhere in one of those steps, you got to get your ingredients. Easy to do from your local brew place. I like What Ails You here in Glendale, Arizona. Get it? Ails you like A-L-E-S instead of, again. Anyways, you can buy a pre-made kit with all the stuff you need, or you can have somebody put it together for you, asking for all the ingredients. I did it today. We are recreating the Sam Adams Winter Lager by none other than the Boston Brewing Company. Feel free to send me some free beer. We have the grains. This is step one. It's a grain bag. It's all the stuff we're using here today, which will go in a grain bag. It's kind of like a sock or some pantyhose. So all the wonderful juices will go into your boil, but none of the garbage will be in there for you to have to sift out. So here's a little trick that I do. Instead of pouring it in, I sock it over. Yeah. Then I dump the whole thing out. Careful not to spill any. This stuff's pretty expensive. No, not really. It's a lot more affordable than buying the beer at the store. No, not really. That's just what I tell my wife. From here, shake it out. Shake it out. I want to tie it off. Look what I do though, so I don't lose anything. All that powder, it's still going in, because later it'll settle to the bottom and we don't have to put it in the bottle. So shake it out. Tie off the bag. Nice and carefully. Don't want it too tight. You want those grains to be able to move. So here we go with a little tie up. Kind of like making a water balloon, but a lot tastier. Okay. And here we have a bag of grains. Okay, now the actual brewing begins. This is our grain bag. Remember, the grains for this batch are primarily, it's mainly wheat and barley, a couple of different kinds. It's malted grains, which means they're soaked and germinated and dried and processed for this. You're not just going out and like grabbing wheat from the field and dumping it in. We're putting it to steep at about 160. That's important. If you get higher than that, it actually has a chemical reaction that you don't want. Steeping is when you soak something in water to extract its flavor. I'm surprised you didn't know that. I drop it in. Blurp, blurp. I, of course, have saved this dust, which I drop in anyway to make sure I get my money's worth and keep the flavor. Remember, all of that garbage will just sink to the bottom later. That's called trub. Surprised you didn't know that. We got about 20 minutes to steep this. In the meantime, while you're waiting, you know what to do. Pro tip, if your wife or your girlfriend or boyfriend or whatever is giving you a hard time about all this brewing, get them involved by making dumb little labels. We usually do a holiday beer because of the temperature in the desert. I'm gonna get into that later, but it makes them really feel like they're in on it, and they can be kind of creative. This is one of the first ones, Bumble Beer. Get it? From the Christmas movie, because Bumbles bounce, chicks love that shit. This one is sort of tricky. If you can figure this out, leave a message and I'll send you a beer. What kind of beer was that? This one was a little throwback to Ozzy. Santa's Solution. Get it? Because that's a double entendre. You probably don't get it. Okay. Really important, probably the most complicated thing when you're brewing is the temperature of when you're doing stuff and the timing. You need a thermometer to keep an eye on your boil, and you need a timer. If you're rich like me, your microwave has a built-in timer. And every now and then, I reach in and dip this baby around to make sure we're soaking out all of that delicious malt grain. The brew continues. Remember, temperature and timing is important when you're brewing. You don't want to overcook stuff. It'll make a chemical bit of idiocy that affects your beer. So, 20 minutes at 160, that's the steep. Don't be afraid to squeeze your bag. Do be afraid to burn your frickin' hand when you reach into this. 160 still kind of warm. Some wimpy babies who don't like flavor beer will say not to squeeze the bag. I say squeeze it and get out all that yummy, brewy goodness. From here, we're gonna bring it back to a boil before we put in our next batch of fermentables. Stay tuned. The brew goes on. We brought all that grain back to a boil. Yes, it can take a while. And now we take it off the boil, remove from heat, and add all of your DME. That's dry malt extract. Sometimes it's LME in a can. That's liquid malt extract. The tough part is you don't want it to clump. So you have to sort of add it slowly, and ideally you'll be stirring it in as you go. This can take a while because sometimes there's a lot, and to get it all out of there, there's a tip coming up. Okay, took a little pause to mix in this dry malt extracts. We had like 6 pounds or more to put in. It's a slow process. You don't want it to clump. You might get some little clumps. If so, just smush them against the edge of your pot to break them up so they fully disintegrate. Here's a little tip. If as you're doing it, the moisture from your boil clumps up any of your stuff, it's a pretty easy fix. Scoop in a little and mix it out. Remember, we want everything to be clean, but this is gonna boil anyway, so impurity should be gone. And if you're lucky enough, like us, and you don't have to pass any health codes, you have a guardian beer dog who plays around in your frickin' cook area. Jesus, this is gonna, cut it. Okay, we got all that dry malt extracts slowly mixed in so it didn't clump. Now we have a nice, beautiful looking wort that's back to a boil, and we're gonna put in our first hop drop. Whatever you're brewing, it's gonna have a schedule. This says half an ounce of Northern for 45 minutes. So the problem is, the only challenge, skunky, is that most of your hop packs come in an ounce. So this says half right now. So I'm gonna try to hold this side and only put in about half. Now it's not like we're launching a shuttle or something. If I get it like slightly over half, probably not the end of the world. I think that's about half. Maybe we'll put in one more, you know, just to be festive. That's got to boil for 45, and then we're going to put in a whole bunch of other stuff. I'll see you right back here at the brew house. All right, there's a lot of work involved here. You might get sweaty working over this hot kettle. If so, switch out to a sleeveless, show off your tats, stay the course. It's not like you're at a restaurant. You can have your pits and your hair in this. Remember, you're the one drinking it. We're still on the hop schedule. The temperature and the time is important. 45 minutes on the first drop. The second drop is an ounce of Saaz hops and a circus of other weird ingredients for this recipe. What did I tell you? Look at right here. It's a freaking nightmare zone. Cinnamon sticks, orange peel, ginger root, Irish moss. It's just a binding agent. We're going to put them all in together and boil for just a few more minutes. Of course, we'll remove those cinnamon sticks once the flavor has all leached out. We have one more hop drop, then we pitch it and start making beer. It's a witch's brew now. Last part of the hop schedule, we have an ounce of Hallertau and the last half of the Northern. Sprinkle them in. Gonna give them about 5 minutes. Then we're gonna pull this baby and cool it so we can pitch the yeast. Pro tip, if you run out of homebrew, it's always acceptable to have something from the store as long as it's quality. Cheers. The cooking part of the brew is over. We've terminated the boil and now we have our whole kettle sitting in a sink of cool water to drop the temp. This is important. Hear me now and believe me later. The difference between ale and lager is that lager ferments at a lower temperature than ale. Lager's around 50-ish and ale is around 70-ish. This is a winter lager, but we're using ale yeast because it's impossible to brew at 50 degrees, or to ferment rather, at 50 degrees in the desert. It's going to have a little slightly different flavor, but it's still going to be delicious. We're dropping the temp down to around 70, and then we're going to pitch the yeast, which will start eating all of the sugar, with the byproduct being alcohol. Don't play around, dude. This ain't no disco. Ready? Go. Okay, we are about to pitch this yeast. That means the yeast eats the sugar and makes the alcohol. That's what makes it beer. We're going to put it in what's called the fermenting vessel. I use a little colander to keep the garbage out. That's called trube. Surprised you didn't know that. This can take a while once it's all poured in, because you can see all these little bits and pieces that flavor this delicious beverage. Those are cinnamon sticks, by the way, not hot dogs. I'm a vegetarian. And while it all soaks in, we relax and have a home brew. Okay, as I mentioned earlier, the hardest thing about brewing is the temperature and the time. We have to pitch this yeast at about 70 degrees. Even though I cooled it in my little water bath, it's still about 100. So all we're gonna do is take cool water out of the fridge, which we prepared, and we're gonna pour it in a little bit at a time and keep checking the temperature. This is important. If you have it too hot, it will kill your yeast, and if you have it too cold, your yeast won't do its job, which is eating sugar and making alcohol. Go. Okay, where are we at now? Ooh. Okay, so despite all that, we're still in the 90s, I'll bet. No problem, we'll put in another cold jug. 86. You gotta be patient. You can't rush things. Like Paula Abdul said, dude, don't rush me. Okay, let's see. If you overshoot it, you gotta put in warm water. So we gotta bring this up to the 5-gallon mark because we did a concentrated boil. 5 is right there. Just so how close are we? If you have natural well water, like we have here in Phoenix, that's going to be delicious. 6, 7, motherfucker. That's pretty damn close. I mean, that is why they call me, I'm an expert. All right, totally unnecessary step. But if you want to know exactly how much alcohol is in your beer, this is a hydrometer. It'll have a reading today because the liquid is sort of thick, and as it alkalizes, it'll get thin, and it'll have a lesser reading. We float this baby. There's a little calculation we do from the original gravity, that's today, to the final gravity, that's once it's fermented. Do a little math and you should have a pretty solid calculation of just how much booze is in there. Looks like we're at about 1.050, and that should drop maybe 0.10 to give us 5% if we did everything right. And I'm sure we did because I'm an expert. Final step to fermentation. We have to pitch the yeast. That is putting the yeast into the vert so it will chew on the sugar and make alcohol as a byproduct. We get everything going so it'll mix in really well, like a little reverse beer tornado, and then we take our yeast. That's why we call it pitching, because we go look at that, I'm about to make beer so delicious. Remember, this is a winter lager, but we're using ale yeast. It might change the flavor slightly, still gonna be delicious. This has to eat the sugar at about 70 degrees. Lager eats at like 50, which is impossible to do in the desert unless you're rich and you can do it all in like a refrigerator or something. Final step, we're about to make this baby get hungry and start eating sugar. Remember, the yeast eats sugar and the byproduct is alcohol, but it burps as it goes. There are gases. So we have what's called an airlock, which allows the burp to happen, but no air to go in. You gotta carefully fill it up with a little water, and then you might have to lube this baby up as usual, and then slide it in. Nice and easy. And then, once you have the proper depth, you put on the cap and the seal. And every time this thing burps, I might get it to do it now. There it goes. Burp. Air goes out. Nothing bad comes in. In 2 weeks, we'll be bottling this and drinking beer. You're welcome. Where it's cold and damp, where I hide all the bodies. Not really. You can't have sex with bones. I've tried.